All right. Now we're going to talk about indispensable stuff, right? How to make yourself indispensable at the product strategy table. That's a high bar. Let's see. I hope we don't disappoint with that. I'm Daniel Voss. I'm the VP of Product Marketing for AppFolio, property management company. And I have a long history. We talked about the 15 years. I probably haven't updated that in a while. It feels older still. So here's why I'm really super honestly competent to talk to you about these topics. And that is, I've really been in all sorts of different size companies. So where I started out, 2003, was Web.de. I'm from Germany, so that was a company that is sort of like Yahoo in the US. I got brought in. I didn't know this was product marketing back then, but I got brought in to manage this product. It was terrible. It was an awful product. All the customers hated it. We had 230 users, and 215 of these users were people within the company that were mandated to use it. So not a great product, left pretty quickly, but ended up doing a lot of go-to-market stuff and messaging, so that was kind of fun. Then I went to Debitel, which is sort of like Sprint in the US, German equivalent, and so I led the development of their e-com storefront. So a lot of actually more engineering type work, working sort of on the product side of things. And then I went to NetViewer, and so that was an early freemium SaaS product, did product-led growth over there. They got bought. Debitel also got bought. And then I went to GoToWebinar, and this is the first actual PMM job that I got. I was really excited. This was in the US, so that's why I moved to the US 8 years ago to work in GoToWebinar. And I co-led the product strategy. Super fun. Got let go. All right. And then I started my own consulting business. I landed one giant client, and then I signed on with AppFolio after I landed the client, and then I had to do these 2 jobs, and so I quit. All right, but now I'm the VP of Product Marketing for AppFolio, and it's super fun, and I'm alive and kicking, and everything's going great. And there's the circle, and the circle's kind of like the previous group talked about, like well-rounded product marketer and like all the things that you need to have. So we have this framework that we introduced at AppFolio to just look at everybody on the team and what are they really like, what are they into, and what are they good at. And so the circle is to say I've kind of done all of it a little bit to some degree of success. So the first one in that, we call this the Merry and Mighty PMM framework. First one of that is discover and share market needs. Right, like so really get close to the customers. Defining and building the solution where you work with the product people and you have fun actually building product and think about roadmap. Aligning and launching that product, right? Getting it out there, go to market, having a big bang moment. Positioning and messaging the solution. We talked about that all morning of how important that is. Publishing and evangelizing content and insights. Marketing and enable sales and care, always fun. Workflows and getting those optimized, and then really customer growth and customer marketing, right? And so you see these little dots there, that's actually my team and how they do so. I give everybody 22 points, which is not a lot, to say what is the stuff that you really, really like doing, so that you get a sense of what does your team really enjoy, and then you give them more points to score themselves on how good they are. So it's a super fun exercise also, because we just talked about hiring too. As you bring new people onto the team, see what are the strengths and weaknesses of the team. All right, so did everything, did it for small companies, big companies, and so on. All right, so with that out of the way, what gets you the seat at the strategy table? I think it's these things. It's like you really want to bring net new insight, something that your team, that the product team, that the leadership team of the organization doesn't yet know, that highlight opportunities that, as an organization, you're really well positioned to exploit, right? So in other terms, you want to know shit. Because when you know shit, you don't have to go and, I heard that today, it's like the first thing you do is you go out and then you align people. And I think that's really hard to do. If you're constantly finding yourself going and trying to align people, if you don't know things, then they don't want to align back, right? You're just noise and you're taking time. So the first step is knowing your stuff so that people come to you and they want to align with you. All right, are you ready? I've got animation built into this because this is going to be cinematic, right? All right, so hang on. And I did this in Google Slides first, so the animations weren't that great. Then I learned we were supposed to do it in PowerPoint, and I'm like, man, I could have done so much more animation. All right, so here are the 2 things. Number 1, wait for the animation. Yes! Talking to customers, okay. Animation number 2, pivot tables. All right, so those are the two things that get you the seat at the table of product strategy. Now you're thinking, really, Daniel, what the F? All right, I spent $1,200 on going here, 30 minutes of my life that I'm spending with this, and what you tell me is like I need to hit the phone and look at spreadsheets. Well, hear me out on this. All right, so talking about pivot tables, like why not Tableau and Snowflake and R and like data science and all the cool stuff, right? Like we're all data-driven product marketers. That should be really important fun, right? Well, so here's the stuff that over these multiple career spots that I've found is really hard about that. Well, first you need this expert that you now have in the middle that's trying to extract that information for you. And so there's a barrier between you and that insight that you want to bring to the strategy table, right? And that expert, you need to ask them really, really good and very precise questions, because otherwise the data scientist doesn't really know what to bring you, and you don't get those insights. And so what I found time and again, this results in is this like pretty slow loop of you going to someone with like not a great question and them coming back, and it becomes a cycle. All right. Pivot tables, on the other hand, are stupid simple to use. Remember I said two things any PMM can do, right? I didn't promise secrets or anything like that. It's two things any of you can actually do every day that makes you more knowledgeable and more likely to have that seat at the table. So pivot table, stupid simple to use. It's literally you click one button. That's it. They're blazingly fast, and that blazingly fast means you can have rapid trial and error like all the time, right? So instead of not knowing what the right question is, you can actually go, you can slice the data, you can look at it, you can discard and say, this was not interesting. It takes you about 30 seconds. And you pull in the next dimension until you find something that actually is interesting. Okay, so this is the unexpected magic of pivot tables. All right. This is, I don't know, who's done pivot tables before? Right? Yeah? Cool. So, right, this is customer data. I've kind of mocked it up with our own data without showing the actual data. And so what I'm pulling in here is all of our account data. So I'm doing an export of the CRM. And that's what I'm doing pretty much any new place I get to. Is the first thing I do within the first week. I'm like, hey, I want to get that data from the CRM system, and I want to have a look at it. And I just dump it into a giant table, and I'll look at a pivot table. And what I look at typically is what kind of segments are there that they have. Are there multiple products? And then I look at how that distributes, you know, which customer is buying which product, what segments are there, and so on. And so here are a couple of examples of, from the past roles, what that has led to pretty early and how that relates to product strategy. So this one is a happy moment. This is GoToWebinar. GoToWebinar wasn't a great product for Citrix, or wasn't a product that had a lot of attention, right? Like that GoToMeeting, that was the main revenue product. And so they had introduced this good, better, best strategy for all the products, good, better, best pricing models. And GoToWebinar was just coasting. One of the first things that we did was look at what's the tier distribution. So you see 74% are on the lowest price tier. And that's your strategy for the next 2 years, was just like, how can we get tier differentiation in the second tier? So for 6 consecutive quarters, we outdid our number every single time just by building tier differentiation in the next higher tier and getting more people as they got into the product to fall into that higher tier. Super simple, right? Not rocket science. So that's why it's like really, anybody can do this, but as a PMM, you are in the seat where you can actually do what anybody could have done, right? You need to go out and do it. One-click segment insight. So this is the pivot example that I showed a moment ago. Really just looking at, okay, what are the products that I have? And then what are our customer segments? So in this case, the customer segments are like from small to large, right? Like on the bottom. And then it's really 3 different segments, right? Or rather 2 segments, segment A, segment B, and customers that have both. And what you can see here is that in the smallest segment, you have a completely different distribution, right? Like type B is actually the segment that is the most important one. And so slicing it that way, you super quickly get at the insight of, oh, actually my messaging, my positioning, my strategy for that segment needs to be completely different. And it only takes you 5 minutes to find that out, where the business has often taken a lot longer, or they haven't gotten to that point. They haven't found the insight. They have found a lot of noise. And they haven't found what matters. Same thing for competitive insights. So AppFolio, that's us, right? And you see all the other competitors. What's different in those competitors? So this is Salesforce data. This is looking at, we've merged in from data sources, competitive information for all the accounts in our space. We have about 20,000 accounts that we're going after, right? So merging in all the competitive information, what are they using today? And then taking a slice at, okay, what are their markets? What are their customers? What do they look like? And in that, we found that we're actually different in terms of distribution. We have a different set of customers than anybody else in the market. So we're doing one thing right that gets us the type of customer that the others have a really hard time winning. And so again, right, like that gets you to strategy. You can come with that to a product organization. You can come with that to a leadership team and say, this actually is a differentiator that we can lean into, right? Like we should talk about this of why we're the best solution and why all the others cannot compete with us in this one segment. Going back to GoToWebinar, and this is the big book of webinar stats. This is one giant pivot table, right? This is our best performing asset for 5 years or so. Best performing lead magnet every single year. You just needed to refresh it once a year, get a new data set, drop it in the same table, boom. You have all the information. Like we had two tables. We had the attendee table, which is kind of like, hey, all the people that attended a webinar in this time frame, and all the dimensions of what they do. How long did they stay? Where did they sign up from, right? Did they fill out a poll? All of that stuff, right? And then we had a second table that was just session data. I think 258,000 rows of session data. And all the information of that, like the titles, how many people had registered, how many people had attended. And what we built from that was this like giant asset, which was really just a big book, as it's called, that said, hey, this is the time when you should host a webinar, right? 10 a.m. in the morning, 11 a.m. in the morning. From that data shows you, gets you the most attendance. Hey, here's when you should time your registration, when you should drop your email, because that's where the people are ready to sign up, right? So just one giant pivot table. You don't need to do much, right? Like it's like, hey, it's a pivot table. Anybody can do it, right? Indispensable, makes you indispensable, and you can do it. All right, fine. Hopefully now you're like, okay, pivot tables, I should spend more time with pivot tables. Sounds great. But like talking to customers, really, it's like obvious much. And so when did you last speak to an actual customer? So this morning when I was in the first keynote, I saw that I think 5 people raised their hand for I'm a solo PMM, right? So that means all of you work in some sort of larger PMM organization, right? And if you're in a small startup and you're the solo PMM, you talk to customers all the time. There's no way to avoid talking to customers, right? But as your organization grows, there's more layers in between, right? So at AppFolio, we have 12 people on the product marketing team. I've got like a client services organization, a sales organization. Their job is to talk to customers, right? And so when I came in, we had this guidance that we had given to everybody that part of your role is talking to customers. Okay, great. Now you'll have someone who is extroverted, and they'll just pick up the phone and they'll call a customer from Salesforce, from the database, right? But then you'll have others who are just not going to take that step. And so you need to structure ways for your teams to have a reason to call customers in a super consistent fashion all the time. So you need to build a process where talking to customers comes to you automatically if you're the PMM, so that everybody has that opportunity to actually understand all the context and understand why the data matters, right? Because like you can look at all the data in the world, and it's hard to give you insight until you actually have the context of why it matters. So that's why it matters to speak to customers. Okay, great. So we think we all know that it matters to speak to customers. So I want to just figure this out quickly. So who works for like a small business or startup? If you can raise your hand. Small business startups. Okay. Mid-sized company. Yep. And now the large corporate enterprises. Yeah. So it's pretty heavy on the bigger company side, and so this is super relevant. All right. By the way, I had amazing emojis in this presentation, and then turned out that didn't work with this, and then I had to put icons in, which my creative director said, yeah, icons are kind of not super cool anymore, and you should really use emojis. And it totally screwed me over here, so if your creative director tells you that, tell them to get the hell out. All right, so this is you, the entrepreneurial PMM, and this is the office, the building, right? You want to get out of the building, or at least pick up the phone, right? All right, here's some of the amazing contextual insight that we got, that you get from talking to customers. So a couple of examples. Okay, so our assumption in one case, so we'll talk about a case. We were seeing there is competitors in our product database. There's accounts, users from competitors, and they're kind of snooping around, right? Like, what are they doing? All right, here's like the redhead, I don't know, whitehead, blackhead, redhead, spies that are trying to get all our product information, and who knows what the nefarious things are that they're going to do with that. And so, and they were doing that, they were getting in on accounts, and the accounts were customers that were churning. And so we were trying to figure out like what's going on there. Why are they letting these competitors in? And it turns out the reality was they were just trying to get their data dump out, and the competitor had offered them that they were just going to do it for them, right? So super straightforward. And we were about, like our legal team was about to like, you know, send cease and desist letters and all of that, right? And we just called customers. So we ended up doing a lot of churn calls, and it turned out that that's really what they were trying to do. And Closed had a session earlier, right, where they talked about win-loss, right? Win-loss is some of the best calls that we found that you can do to get at that insight, right? Like, where are people, why have you won them, why have you lost them? Have a quick call, get that insight. All right, that was one. This is a bit of an eye chart, but we went into planning this year, as I'm sure you all are going into planning with your teams, right? And one of the things that we wanted to do for the planning process was to say, what are the market trends out there, right? Like, we're in real estate, there's tons going on, inflation, recession, whatever, right? Like, we need to figure this out. And so the process we took was, we took a look at internal people, and we said, hey, you're the smart people in the room that know something about real estate. What are you seeing? Then, as a PMM team, we did a bunch of just desk research and looking at articles and research papers and trying to figure out like what's going on out there in the market. And then we also got a bunch of third-party research. We assembled all of that stuff, and then we went into a step of actually adding context with customers. So having customer calls on these trends. What are you seeing in your business? How is this impacting you? How does this matter to you? So survey data plus actual customer interviews. So this was the picture initially that we had before we talked to customers, right? So, well, there's all this stuff going on. How am I supposed to know, right? Like, I'm not an economist from Harvard, right? Of how all this stuff goes together. And then we had this like, right, beautiful mind moment where we were kind of all freaked out and we didn't know what to do with all that information, right? And adding customer conversations was super clarifying, right? And you could see how all of these trends were impacting them, how the labor shortage was affecting them putting construction together and bringing inventory of new apartments to market, and how all of that contributed to the housing shortage. So being able to figure all of that stuff out to the point earlier of you need to know shit, because if you know shit, then people are going to come to you, and you have a seat at the strategy table because you bring information that is relevant to the business that they don't yet know, that you are in a prime position to get to them. All right, great, so that's all super useful. How do you institute that? So this is just one way of instituting it, right? Like, so what we're still working on right now is instituting like really regularly the win-loss interviews. But one thing that was just super easy, because I wanted the entire team to have a reason to talk to customers every week in a way that it would come to them and it wouldn't have to be on the individual to go and find a reason to talk to a customer. And the way we did that was NPS closed loop calls, right? So this is something that our CX organization together with client services had been doing for support detractor comments, right? Like, hey, support sucks. Somebody picks up the phone and says, okay, well, what was the experience? We're trying to solve the problem for you. And so we got in on that. And the things that we said in the NPS feedback that we want to get in front of the PMMs was competitor mentions, right? So any NPS comment that mentions a competitor, a mention of pricing, anything that challenged our value prop. So we say we're easy to use. Surprise. And If the NPS says, this is so hard to use, I can't figure this thing out, right? Like that's what we want. That's who we want to talk to. And anybody who was really talkative and gave this in-depth perspective of, here's like the 15 things I would change about your product. So all of the PMMs get a Salesforce task once a week. We assign just 2 customers so that you have 2 organic opportunities to talk to a customer every week. And then you just hit the phone and you close the loop. And that way you have that context for everybody on the team. And you can really make sure that everybody in the room is knowledgeable and can show up at the table no matter what level they're at and bring insight from actual customer conversation. Because it's so powerful if you can say, well, wait a minute, but last week I spoke to customer so-and-so, and they said, what you say is crap, right? Like, so you're talking to your product team or your sales team. It's like a great way to have actual contextual insight from those conversations. But hey, oh yes, what also matters is building a good relationship with your PM counterparts. So that's kind of like my bonus happy tip. I only had 1 photo, but there's 3 of them. So 3 bromances from the last 3 teams, and building really strong relationships with your PM counterparts. That's a lot of fun too. So to recap, you want to really grab any table, right? Just any table, and you take the pivot table and you hit the number, you hit the 1 button, and you take a look at it and you slice and dice it and have some fun with it. Pick up the phone or get out of the building and talk to customers. And then really rinse and repeat until you know 4 things, right? Until you know your market really well, until you know your product really well, your competitors, but above all, until you know your customers inside out and can bring that insight to any conversation in the business, to the leadership team, to sales, to the product team. And that's how you get a seat at the table, right? If you know things that they don't know and you can actually deliver insight. That was already it. Thank you very much. All right.
All right, so questions? Who has questions for Daniel? All right, we got one here. I'll go up there.
Thank you. So my question for you is that we have a bunch of PMMs and also PMs who are dying to talk to customers. And we are all like hitting up our account manager saying, hey, can I get on a call the next time you're on the phone with a customer? And we're getting pushback from our account managers saying, I have a really long agenda I need to talk to my accounts about. I don't have time to do discovery. How have you managed that type of situation?
So at our company, we have account managers for not every single account, right? So we've tried that. We've tried to piggyback on the account managers and go, for example, do these quarterly executive business reviews. And tagging onto that has just not been super interesting because, to your point, right, like you don't get the time of day. You're hearing them talk about something. Their account rep has a specific thing that they want to get done, and you're not getting to actually asking questions and hearing insight, right? And so what we did was we sat together with the client services team and the sales team, and we said, so for the sales team, we said, what are your priority accounts where we don't want to get in your way, right? Where you're trying to build a deal and put a deal together, and we want to stay out of your hair. And then we talked to the client service team and said, which are the customers on your end that you feel like you're underserving or that don't have an account manager attached? And that's where we went first for discovery calls, just to not have like where it's additive. And that's kind of worked for us. Great question.
Anybody else have questions for Daniel? We have one here in the middle. Josie will give you the mic.
Hi.
Hi.
I kind of want to piggyback off of that question. Similarly, at my company, the product marketers have a challenge where we want to talk to customers, but we're told there are the teams that already do that. Teams like enablement, teams like the account teams, teams like product teams. All of these people are already doing that. Why do you want to duplicate their work? The challenge, of course, becomes that then we're getting it all kind of hearsay. We're not getting it straight from the source. What would you recommend as sort of a response to that comment?
I think you can try the way of why is what we're going to be doing different from what everybody else is doing, and I think like the main difference is, and that goes back to the wheel, right? Like as a PMM, we cover the intersection of all these things. We cover the intersections of service, sales, product, right? And so we take a broad perspective at a problem. And every single one of the teams in the organization that are doing these calls today are doing a specific slice, right? Like they're either trying to sell something or they're trying to close a ticket. And so I think like that's the, come at them with education. I think the other way is if you're not succeeding in the education route is to come at them with like, can I help you with anything? So in our case, right, like with the CX team, right? Again, they were trying to do this closed loop. I actually saw that in one of the strategy docs, and they were trying to expand it, and they had a problem of expanding it because they didn't have enough PMs that were going to be able to pick up the phones, right? So we said, hey, we're here, right? We're happy to pick up the phone for you. And so are there any organic opportunities where you can actually help a team out and get your wish at the same time?
Yeah, a lot of times the sales folk are complaining about something that product isn't doing, and they don't understand why product doesn't get their point. And you can help them build that case, because usually they don't have time to build the case, right? Because they're too busy selling. So he gave an example of how to help the product team, but you can also, if it seems like it's more sales and the account executives that are not giving you the open door, so it's how do you partner with them, listen to them, and help them, help me help you, right, kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think one more to that is, can you package it in a project that someone wants anyway, right? Can you put it into win-loss analysis and use that as your reason why you're doing the calls? Can you do a persona refresh and use that as a reason why you're doing the calls, right? Like so that you have a more legitimate business reason for why you're doing it and kind of get your foot in the door. Okay, there's one more over there. Yes.
Right. Oh, here we have one in the middle. Just one sec, sorry. Let me just get the microphone out here. You're pretty audible, but.
Oh, thanks. For those of us who are B2C, and let's imagine you were going to a B2C company, what would be the first thing that you would do of those two?
I haven't been in a B2C company for so long, right? Like the last time was the e-com storefront. But I think I would still look at the buying patterns, right? So if I look like, which is granted just one B2C business, but we were selling like phones and phone contracts, right? Contracts from the big mobile providers, and then the phones, and just matching that together. And I would just look at anything that makes a giant table, right? Like what is the stuff that we've sold recently, and like what are all the potential dimensions that I would want to know about them? Again, right? Like you're not going to get to the point where you build some like elaborate data science-y, hey, I like know all the inputting factors and like how they're weighted. But I think like the thing that we can bring as PMMs that the rest of the organization doesn't have is telling people where to look, or figuring out, like being the first to figure out like where to look and where there's something interesting. And then you can hand it over and say, okay, like we found this thing, this looks interesting, we don't really have the explanation, can you help us go deep into that? And then you can bring in the data scientists and they can knock it out the park, right?
Also like support or websites where people complain about your service is a great place too. Any other questions for Daniel? We got time for one more. All righty. Oh, is there one up here? Okay, I got you.
Hey, Daniel, thanks again for your presentation. I had a quick question, clarification about how you run NPS. You give members of your team interviews for detractors. Do you see value in also giving them interviews with people who rated your product positively? It sounds like you made some sort of decision there, and I'm curious as to why you only choose detractors and not everyone.
Yeah. That's a great question. We want to do the promoters too, We started with the detractors because when the CS team was doing it, they're looking mostly at detractors. So they had their whole process set up around filtering out the detractors. But we are going to expand that to promoters too. And I think that goes back to, I think the guys from Close were saying this too, right? Like, okay, you're interested in looking at loss data, but then the next step, you also want to look at your win data. So no reason other than sequence, really. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right, join me in thanking Daniel. Thanks so